When I read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning for the first time, there was a part in it that got my attention, and I will never forget it. On occasions, Viktor, together with other prisoners in Auschwitz, would improvise artistic shows, and they would recite poems, they would dance, they would read letters to their loved ones, especially those that didn't make it, and even tell jokes about their circumstances in the camp. Just imagining that real scene, like that happened in reality, them laughing out loud at the unfortunate destiny that brought them there, made me realize that is the key component that encapsulates what spirituality means. But not only that, also it leaves us with this question of maybe it's not only this new age woo-woo kumbaya concept, but an intrinsic dimension of the human experience. Hello everyone once again. I'm Eva Amory and this is Humans Academy Podcast, the place where we use the therapeutic power and benefits of the narrative arts. And yes, today we're going to be exploring spirituality from a philosophical, narrative and anthropological perspective. What is spirituality? Is it only for religious people? If I'm a secular person, am I allowed to have a spiritual life? What does spirituality has to do with storytelling or narrative? Is it implicitly saying that we are all spiritual creatures? And most importantly, is it related to my loss of identity? Meaning, is it my lack of spiritual practices related to my feelings of disconnection and loneliness nowadays? If any of these questions resonated with you, stay tuned, because I promise you that by the end of this episode, you're going to have a new language to understand your most basic human needs. The capacity to connect with life and meaning, with what cannot be expressed or fully processed, and most importantly, the connection with others, but also with yourself in the most humanistic way. Welcome to episode 5. In the previous episode, I shared with you my very personal resolution method, the one I call the infinite game. I'm gonna leave it somewhere here in case that you want to watch it. By the way, I think it's in a playlist, just in case that you get confused by many videos. In that video, I also mentioned that spirituality is for me the most important dimension of life. But I haven't always been this a spiritual advocate and daily practitioner. And in case that you're wondering, I'm a secular person, meaning I don't refuse faith or the benefit of some religious practices, but I hate, and I would say it's my biggest enemy in life, the dogmatic and endogamic thinking. But the way I define, think, and also practice my spirituality today is pretty much influenced by the biggest names that has been influencing me on this concept. Philosophers and psychologists like Esther Perel, Alain de Botton, Viktor Frankl, and most recently, Farid Dieck. They all teach their wisdom in the intersection of philosophy, science, and art. Storytelling, to be more precise. And that's the triad I look for in experts to configure my identity, not only as a human, but also as a practitioner and now a public speaker. Because as Farid Dieck says, philosophy asks, science explains, but art expresses. The work of Alain de Botton on religion for secular people teaches us that one of the biggest tragedies came from the separation of the religious identity and automatically disregarding anything that had to do with the religious way of life. And because of that, we have lost many incredible societal benefits that came from religious practices, like, for example, gathering once a week with strangers, repeating or rehearsing our lessons every week or every 2 weeks. Can you imagine how beneficial it would be for us to have a ritual of rehearsing every week or every month our values, our goals, who we are, what do we stand for, what do we defend. It would be amazing. It would remember us, our identity. The idea of ceremonies, rituals, special days marked in the calendar just to remind ourselves of the important things in life. Thinking about the psychological benefits of that repetition, of that sense of certainty and continuity in our lives. That was one of the biggest introductions of religion in our lives, to remember ourselves, who we are, and our identity also as a collective. All these practices are way older than religion as we know it today. It talks more about an intrinsic human need for connection and understanding of the unknown, but also the need for familiarity and continuity. For me, spirituality is this narrative language that translates inner and outer worlds and intertwine them, that connects the finite with the infinite and help us with experiences that are too complex to understand and process from a human scale. Like think, for example, grief, ambivalence, the unknown, transitions in life, beauty. Can you translate beauty if it's not through spirituality? It's impossible. And as with any other human skill, some of us will develop it further, but it's also going to depend on the context where you live, the culture in which you live, and basically the influences you have around you. Is it clear that at a certain point in history, we needed predictability, certainty, and order? And so we started practicing science, and science became repetition. Repetition became habit. Habit became routine. And over time, that became tradition. That's the beginning of culture, and rituals are its smallest units. But what is the difference then between rituals and routines? To answer that question, I want to introduce you to the biggest influence in my personal and professional life, Esther Perel. Her body of work includes the topics I'm most interested in: erotic intelligence, relational intelligence, cross-cultural awareness, but also conflict awareness. Being a polyglot who speaks 9 languages, together with her life experience being the daughter of Holocaust survivors and her understanding of the modern world circumstances, made her the wittiest, most real voice out there who speaks about the challenges that couples, communities, and social groups encounter today. According to her, and almost quoting her, there are so many things that routines and rituals share in common. So, for example, they both help us delineate space and time. If you think back to COVID and the lockdown, you start noticing that many of us started having a lot of new routines, habits, but also rituals. And it was because of this, because we need a predictable structure, a sense of anticipation, something to look up to. Also, the transition from one task to the next, a grounding rhythm, an effect of stability and certainty. And last but not least, they convey calmness and reassurance. And what makes them different then? Whereas routine gives us clear familiarity and create that continuity and ground us in reality, meaning the material world, rituals create excitement and they elevate us to the spirit level. It's the invisible world. Routines also give us stability, whereas rituals give us meaning and purpose. They are imbued in meaning, right? Routines, on the other hand, are actions to help us develop new skills. But rituals foster creativity, introduce novelty, is driven by intention. Routines, as I said, give us continuity, stability, predictability. And rituals, on the other hand, they guide us through transitions. Is where we close the gap between the now and the tomorrow, or the past and the today. So how do we translate this in real world? Because what happens is that sometimes they overlap, and sometimes the difference between a routine and a ritual is basically one very little tiny detail that you add, that creativity component that I was talking about. So for example, cooking dinner every day, that is routine, right? But if you invite some friends, you take your special china, lit some candles, and put some background music, that is a ritual. Brushing your teeth every day, that is routine. But as Esther Perel says again, letting a little bit of toothpaste on the toothbrush of your partner every night, that is a ritual. So you start seeing the difference, and you start realizing that you can translate any routine into a ritual. And probably you're already practicing them, right? And of course, rituals can be individual or collective. So for example, in my case, my journaling every single morning, sitting down on this couch, opening my journal, having my coffee, playing some background music, and looking at the sea from here, and just writing that first sentence. That is for me so spiritual. And what I realized also is that with my clients, they also have plenty of them. And the more we talk about those differences between routines and rituals, they start sharing more and more. And maybe they were not that conscious. They are bringing sometimes for the first time that consciousness into, oh wow, I didn't realize how important those little moments are for me in my daily life. In my everyday practice helping people in their recovery process through addiction, my favorite ritual has become the day closing. And I get to see the three major basic human needs that rituals provide. Every evening, we would sit down in a cycle and tell how our day was, the challenges we faced, but also the little or big milestones that we had that day. On occasion, someone would share something really vulnerable. And like a domino effect, it will imbue the whole room, passing on to the next person and the next person, becoming the room itself a container for self-forgiveness and permission. And I always tell them, every time you tell your story, you're giving permission to another person to own their story. And I think in such a context, it's such a brave act. We always end up with the serenity prayer and also hugging each other as a reminder that we belong here. One of the most fundamental human needs is the need for belonging and meaning. This is mostly transmitted through storytelling. That is the connection, the intrinsic connection of humans with stories. We humans are made of stories, not genes, as historian Yuval Noah Harari would suggest. Long before books or institutions or any kind of organized society, humans sat down around fires, and it was not out of entertainment. Probably they were also looking for that, but mainly because by doing so, they remind themselves of who they were, their values and their collective identity. And this is key to understand today's human disconnection, because we are missing spaces in which we can share our common values, everything that gives meaning to our lives. Like, we are seeing a lot of polarizing in society, and I'm not talking politically only. You're seeing this mentality and dialogue and use of words, you versus me, they versus us. It's all over society, and it takes very little for people to get caught up in this mentality of polarization. This is why narrative and collective identity is so needed today. To have a common identity, to know what we stand for, to know how do we move on in life as a society. All those things are really important. On an individual level, owning and telling our own story is how we take power over our past, our suffering, and how we rewrite our own stories. And on a collective level, telling our stories is how we bind together, is how we create communities, and that give us meaning and belonging. I'm pretty sure that you have had this spiritual experience when another person comes to you and tells you something that is for both of you is slightly important. All of a sudden, you feel seen, you feel understood, that you in that precise moment matter to another human. That is the power of storytelling. Stories not only tell us what happened, it tells us who we are. And that need not only to locate ourselves in a larger scale, but to feel seen and understood by other people is intrinsic to our gregarious nature. The second need that rituals provide is the need for closure through difficult transitions. Grief is probably the hardest experience a human has to go through when it comes to transitions, because it marks a very clear before and after in our lives that we cannot undo. Someone was here and 24 hours later, they are gone. Maybe it was a sudden death or a breakup, but life as we knew it ends and something unfamiliar begins. This is what thinker and psychologist Farid Dieck would call having an encounter with the absurdity of life, because we start this battle with the things that we cannot control. It's the most humble experience a human can have with reality. What makes loss so destabilizing is not the loss itself, but is the eternal unanswered questions that we will carry with us for the rest of our lives. And there are moments in which language collapses, logic is completely irrelevant, and the mind is just trying to keep up with what the heart has just experienced. This is where rituals become essential, and I have experienced this myself, but I see this every single day also in the day closing. Sometimes they expected the day to bring them something different, and for whatever reason, they didn't accomplish what they wanted in their recovery process that day. And the day closing is the space that symbolizes precisely that, a closure. It says tomorrow there will be another chance to build more, to progress more, or maybe just to pause and reflect, but today is gone, and we are going to celebrate and honor whatever has happened today. It's a constant exercise of humility and acceptance of the things that we cannot change or control, as the serenity prayer also invite us to reflect at the end of the ritual. And doing this in a collective context is super powerful. Rituals gave shape to experiences that otherwise would feel infinite and unbearable. They mark the end of a chapter and the beginning of another one, when we are still trying to cope with how to live in that new one. And it sets an intention that even if we don't know how to live in that new chapter, it says, I give myself permission to have a new beginning, and I accept that life as I knew it no longer exists. This doesn't apply only to death. We grieve many things. We grieve relationships. We grieve identities, careers, versions of ourselves, and futures that we will never have. Every major transition asks the same question, which is, how do I let go of what was without losing myself in the process? Under this same question, I have created my most requested session at work. It's a let go practice that I have called Letter to the Unmet Needs and Unfairness of Life. It has become famous for being the toughest in emotional and spiritual terms, but also the most liberating. It's a letter addressed to life itself, as you can imagine, and its major purpose is for us to let go of the hidden desires of our souls, maybe desires that have been with us and we have been carrying with us for as long as we can remember. Those things that we secretly wished would have never happened but did, or things that we longed for but we will never be. As Dr. Chefali Savari says, it's not only what happened to us that we carry with us, but also what didn't happen that should have happened. This is a session to give yourself permission for a new start in your life. This is done by bringing into consciousness things that maybe you are not conscious about in some areas of your life. And maybe you're waiting for something or someone to give it to you. Maybe closure, maybe transition, or maybe permission to do or be someone. I'm going to leave you the practice, this let go practice, in the description box. Basically, it consists of 3 parts. The first one, of course, is the writing of the letter. The second one is when we provide a container somewhere where we are going to do that ceremony. And so we set candles and we do this gezellig, as Dutch people say, atmosphere. So it becomes the place where we are going to celebrate and honor that new transition. And the last part is the ownership ceremony, where we take our letters, we read them out loud, or maybe sometimes we only share a little fragment. Some people decide not to share anything, and that is more than okay. We normally do this outdoors so we can burn the letters. And after we have read all the fragments or the pieces of it that we want to share, we take ownership over our lives. And this is the most crucial moment on the ceremony, because it's when we say out loud the affirmations of ownership. We take the reins over our lives. This is so beautiful. It's when people start saying things like, I give myself permission for. So, for example, a person who has been dealing his entire life with trusting other people, they say out loud, today I give myself permission to trust other people and do what I never was capable of. It's really beautiful and it's really magical. And at this point, everyone is really crying and sobbing. I would suggest you do in a group context. And if you also want to do it alone, is more than okay. I have a version that I do individually and I call my Ukrainian ritual. And this is also coming from the Ukrainian culture and how much I've been influenced by Ukrainians because of a project I was doing back in 2022 for Ukrainian refugees here in Malaga. And I discovered about this ritual that they have that marks the end of the Christmas period, which is like a kind of baptism. And so what I do is I write a letter to my old version, the version at the beginning of 2025, and I say goodbye to the parts I no longer need. So what I do is I write a letter, I burn that letter close to the sea, and then I baptize myself into the sea, and then I come out of the sea and write a letter for the new version of me who is going to be born in that moment. It gives me permission to see a new Eva. It's really liberating to do this every single year. I can also provide that ritual that I just mentioned if you want in the description box. Just let me know in the comments. As I mentioned before, rituals have this sense of anchoring people, right? And in religious practices, offering a mass every Sunday to the community was like a ritual to give people continuity and a repetition and something stable in their lives, apart from preaching their teachings, right? So no matter what happened during the week or in our lives, we knew that on Sunday there was the Mass and that we will gather together and we will have that as a stable element in our lives. But there is something really profound in that repetition that says beyond doctrine or belief, there is something more important to humans' life. When we are in the most uncertain moments in our lives, there is something to hold on to, something to hope for. This is exactly what Viktor Frankl was referring to in the fragment I told you at the beginning from Man's Search for Meaning. When everything around you has lost any coherence, when reality feels absurd, cruel, and even dehumanizing, rituals become an act of rebellion, but also responsibility and hope. If there is something that we learned the hard way during the pandemic lockdown, it is in the most unstable circumstances in life that rituals matter most. This is for me so fundamental that I would dare to say that this entire project, Humans Academy, revolved around that philosophical view of life that I have. And that is that we are wearing a human. You and I, we're wearing a human. This is human Eva. And my own responsibility in life is to take care of her in the circumstances she has, with the tools she has. Same with Viktor Frankl. Sometimes rituals are the only tool that we have to take care of the human that we have. And rituals don't change the circumstances, but they can change our relationship with the circumstances we have. In the darkest moments, anticipation and hope is not trivial. It's a psychological survival strategy. And sometimes that's more than enough to keep us alive and keep us going. In Auschwitz, hope didn't come from certainty about the future. It came from those little acts where they would transmit themselves dignity. Those small acts that say, I'm a human being, even in these circumstances. And as long as I keep giving myself hope and meaning, I belong to this life. Many communities, not only religious, benefit from having rituals. In AA meetings, for example, these are communities where the people who come have very little support systems and they have no structure sometimes at all in their lives. And by attending these meetings on a regular basis, they start having some hope that they can handle and continue with their lives. And I can see this also on a daily basis at work as well. You start seeing that something that is routine, coming to these activities, coming to the storytelling reunions and the gatherings where they tell their stories, start like as a routine, but slowly becomes a ritual. And one of the clearest signs that they are in fact progressing and getting along in life is when they come to me and say that they have started also a ritual with other 2 or 3 members of the community, so they can keep themselves accountable and have a rhythm and a meaning in their lives. For me, these acts of hope are the proof that rituals have the power to put people back into their lives with enthusiasm and have a beautiful connection with life itself, with themselves, and with other people. So I have discovered in the way that I practice my spirituality, and also looking at what other people has taught me in the ways that they explore spirituality, that there are 5 major categories through which we experience spirituality. And those are creativity, religious practices, we would say, ceremonies and rituals, as we have been also saying here, culture, and counterintuitively, discipline. And I want to focus on all of them for a while so you can understand what do I mean with each of these categories. So for example, creativity is every single act of self-expression that you have in your everyday life. So for example, the writing, the singing, the dancing, the cooking, everything that has to do with creating something or you expressing yourself through doing something. Then the religious practices, those that have been considered in popular terms coming from religion, but as I said, they are coming from long before religion existed. Those are, for example, praying, advising other people, or mentoring, or doing acts of service for others, reciting, for example, like every time that we are preaching something and giving lessons to an audience, that is also pretty much a religion practice. Then culture. What I mean is anything that has to do with you exploring or enjoying culture through your senses. So instead of being more active, as in the creativity section, is more passive, we could say. For example, listening to music, enjoying cuisine, like you go to a restaurant and you taste different international cuisine. Maybe you go to museums and embrace beauty that is really, really spiritual. You go to a theater show or you watch movies, series shows, you read books, all that kind of things can also bring you very spiritual moments to your life. Then rituals and ceremony. What I mean by that is when you are actively being the person who organizes these kind of events, whether they are individual or in a communal sense. So for example, weddings, funerals, baby showers, birthday parties. I even heard Esther Perel saying breakup parties. Like one of her friends, she was doing a breakup party. And then last but not least, discipline. Yes, routine with intention, meaning and value becomes rituals. People going, for example, to the gym. If you go to the gym and you have a very specific order in which you like to do things, most chances are that you feel connected on a spiritual level to that routine or that discipline process. Things that we tend to do on a daily basis, like, for example, driving the car, going to the supermarket. Those, as we said, are routine. But if we have like a very specific way in which we like to do things that have imbued creativity and meaning, probably has already become a ritual. That was it for today, guys. I hope, guys, that you enjoyed this topic as much as I have enjoyed it. I'm super interested in knowing all your rituals. Please let me know in the comments. I want to know if you have any family or relationship kind of ritual. How did you come out with such creativity? We have plenty of them in Spain and in the south of Spain as well. But I'm open to incorporate new rituals in my life. If all of this resonated with you and you're going right now through a transition of reinvention, or maybe you're going through a grieving process and you know very clear about who you are, what makes you you and what makes you special, I'm going to suggest you to subscribe, because on the next episode I'm going to bring you exercises where you can discover who you are and what makes you being this unique and special human through storytelling. Stay tuned, and I see you on the next episode.